I remember this time. I'm not late on a second half rerun patch. This time I remembered. So, second half of 3.7 is about to be here with the reruns of Phainon, Mydei, and Cipher. Today we're going to be talking about all three of them, going over their spots and how they were and how they're holding up to this day, what buffs they did receive and such. And by buffs, I mean like team variety, so they got stronger. And then I'll talk about reasons why you should or should not summon for them overall. Usually in these videos, people end up asking questions that I answer in the videos, so please, before you comment, watch this video fully. And if it's a team building related question, I have full guides that you can check out on my channel for these characters as well. So starting it off with probably the most anticipated one being Phainon's rerun. The Phainon spot in the meta hasn't really changed. As good as he was a DPS, he still is that good. He actually got stronger thanks to the release of Cyrene and now Cyrene. Cyrene is his best partner to use alongside him, and Cyrene really just opens some team building options as she did bring more team variety for you to run. So yeah, Phainon still does actually hold up as a really strong character. When he released, he was a really strong DPS once you did get him to transform. There's many ways to figure out how to get him to transform through that hurdle. Maybe you'd action advance a different support to keep buff up time. There was the whole having Sunday faster than Bronya and such as well. It was also great that he could really just be used with any support that did somewhat target him at least, so even like Ting Yun, the 4-star, was good. But yeah, mainly the problem was if you either were not able to invest in him too much since he got really strong with vertical investment, or if he just didn't have the teammates for him because he did require some strong teammates to make him do good enough damage. He also was kind of held up that no sustain was really that good with him because the whole point was the best results would be him sustainless, which still is true. But it was also just mainly because he had no form of actually getting sustained properly, because once you go into ultimate, everyone's departed, no one can act, so no one can heal you or give you a shield. That was solved with the release of Danheng, who now can be Phainon's best sustain, who is Phainon's best sustain, and is also free. So Phainon did actually just get a bunch of extra buffs to his teams, which incorporated more team building variety against Cyrene, which was like the biggest jump, which you can honestly take all the buffs she provides and just kind of ignore it, minus all type res pen. And then if you do have E1, then the defense ignore provides. And really just look at the fact that she duplicates his meteor. 2 meteors is just so insane because the meteor is the biggest part of his kit. It's the most damage you'll see from him and is what is really strong. So Cyrene really just gave him a big jump, which also allowed him to have a lot more lower cost clear potential. Then we got Danheng, who was like the final sustain to be good with him because that was like a missing part. If you did really need to run a sustain, running a sustain like Fofo or Venturin, they were fine, but it was just annoying just because once you did go into ultimate with Phainon, as I mentioned, they get departed, so Fofo can't heal you anymore, or whatever healer you're running, Venturin can no longer refresh his shield. So once you go into ultimate, no more healing. Once you go into ultimate, if you ran to Venturin or even Japard, then no more shield. With the release of Danheng, you were not only able to target him, not only able to buff him, but also have the ability to attach a actual summon to him, dedicating him as bondmate, and be able to refresh his shield within his ultimate, which is really good, especially with people with lower investment, because Phainon is the definition of brute force to this day. And the whole idea was to kill before you exited ultimate. Obviously, if you couldn't and maybe you needed a second one, you would run a sustain just so you don't die outside of the first one. But the whole idea of killing within the first ultimate was great. And now with the release of Danheng, you finally have a way to get ultimate quicker since you can target. Really good sustainability so you don't worry about dying. Buffing so it's not only just the sustain capabilities from the actual sustain for Phainon's core flames. And now you don't have to worry about dying in ultimate either, so you don't end up exiting out too quick. So Phainon just received a bunch of buffs and now Cyrene, which isn't like a crazy jump, like it's noticeable, and she's mainly there to open up more team ideas, such as maybe even moving your Sunday to a different team or whoever support you want to replace there. True damage access on him is also really good because he does such high damage, so true damage is going to be good. And depending on your actual possibility of teams, you could also just run an E1 Chibi for that instead, which I used to recommend a lot and I still do. But it was only for people who either were able to run sustainless and also not have a problem with getting into the first ultimate, because running an AoE buffer means you weren't actually able to get another character to give you core flame, so it really depended on you. But yeah, Phainon still very strong unit, as good as he was, if not just better now because of the release of Cyrene for team building, and especially Danheng if you did need to run a sustain, so still to this day very strong unit. Next up is Cipher. So Cipher probably was the most doom posted, no, maybe second most doom posted unit of the 3.x era. Nonetheless, most people have by now seen her actual potential and wasn't like the whole cope situation as we had. I'm not even going to go over it because it was just such a meme. Nonetheless, Cipher released, all doom posting aside, a extremely strong debuffer and is practically the best debuffer in the game, minus Tide being with Silverwolf. So, like, they're both tied in their cases, but a lot of times Cipher ends up being better depending on your team. Nonetheless, Cipher is just an extremely strong character who really just can go on any team, honestly. She makes enemies take more damage by just existing. If you have her light cone, you have defense shred on top of that. Her damage potential is also very nice as a sub DPS. And then her whole playstyle of having the ultimate be a nuke at the very end is kind of just something you can't really power creep either. It really just depends on if you are the one doing good enough damage to have the nuke do good damage. So the more damage you do with your actual DPS builds and such is the more damage Cipher is going to do at the end. If you do enough damage, you can straight up one-shot an entire phase of a boss. It's really handy and also really good in something like Zero Cycles especially, because getting rid of that extra phase or at least half the phase is really damn good. And also just insanely good in Sustainless because her skill makes enemies do less damage to you because it inflicts weakens, so that's even better. But it's not even just the side of being a Sustainless character, it's just the fact that she's just a really good debuffer that can go anywhere. No matter the team she's on, she's gonna make your team do more damage to the enemies. Having a really good light cone and also a really good E1 for even more tally buildup is also just really good. So actually just very easy to use and also can be used as a skill point generator at the same time for teams that might need it, so that's even another big portion. Great on the Archer team, best in slot in the Phase team, best in slot in the Acheron teams. Is just insane how good she is. Those are like the main 3 teams that people will talk about with her on it, but again, she can work with like really any of the Crisis heirs as well. Put her on Anaxa teams, you can even put her on Phainon teams because her actual trace that makes enemies take more damage by just existing still counts when Phainon is in his ultimate. I don't know why, but it does. You can even put her with like Castress or Evernight because she just worked. Obviously that team is set in stone, so if you have the full team you don't want to do that, but if you don't, you can use Cipher as an alternative. She's really just this unit that can go with really anyone. As long as the DPS themselves are doing good damage, you will have Cipher unleash the tally, which is going to do really good damage. And because the whole playstyle, you can just fully bet on the actual tally buildup and just ignore building her DPS at all. So you can build her support, the runner like 2p speed, and then a supportive set for your main DPS and only really use her for the actual nuke at the very end. Or you can build her as a sub DPS, give her a 4-piece Pioneer and then 2-piece of like something like Glamoth that will always be active and you're good to go. And then her sub DPS potential is also really good, especially nowadays where there isn't too many sub DPSs in the game. Usually it's always set as the main DPS, just supports, which usually would be form of some sub DPS if they do attack, and then the sustain or whatever in that slot. So Cipher being a dedicated debuffer and also really good sub DPS is something we really did need nowadays. So Cipher is genuinely just a really good unit that can really just go on any team, and is definitely a unit that was doom posted a little too much and a lot of people overlooked her value. She is just incredibly strong. Now finally we have Mydei. So Mydei is an interesting case because he was probably the unit that really just received no changes going out the entire time until Cyrene. He was never weak per se, but when it came to every other unit we got, especially with like the Remembrance team building up, Anaxa doing what he did, Phainon doing what he did, and then other characters like Tribi and Cipher being just so broken in their roles, Mydei was definitely the one to be overlooked just because like he was strong, but he wasn't like at their level. At least when it came to like an E0 S1 perspective. If you got E1, he put himself at a lot better of a perspective because he was kind of blast and he did come out when everything was kind of AoE centric, and his E1 making his Godslayer, which is his biggest attack, be fully AoE and increased damage was really good. But Mydei also had ways to get around it and at least have really insane damage output, such as being insanely good in sustainless setups where you don't really have to run a sustain with him just because he doesn't die. You have up to 3 revives in the Vendetta state, so you can just abuse that and run another support instead. And then if you ran a triple support setup with him, he was insanely strong. His damage output is really simple. You don't even have to control him, so the usage wise is really simple, and to this day he's just really simple to use. So you really just give him a -1 setup. You'd give him Tribi on the team instead. Unfortunately, he didn't really receive a big buff from Hyacinth like the other HP supports because it kind of just like worked in a bad way where you only gain 1 point of charge, which is useless when you need 150. So you mainly just ran someone like Luocha or Gallagher who have better single target healing anyways, so that was kind of unfortunate. So again, if you were running sustained, you would run Luocha or Gallagher alongside him, Mydei himself. You'd mainly want to have Tribi because that was like one of the only supports that gave him a really good amount of buffs, and then a -1 setup with either Brodia or Sunday. Or if you did a base speed Mydei, then you would just do like a hyper speed, one of those supports, or Sparkle. Fast forward to now the release of Cyrene, he did receive a big buff to his playstyle, which now you can actually run Hyacinth just to charge Cyrene. So now you'd run Tribi, Mydei, Hyacinth, and Cyrene. Where now the entire goal is to not really have him himself act. The whole goal is to get Cyrene as many charges to buff Mydei. And while Mydei is in Vendetta, he gets an instant Godslayer that also gets a 200% increase to crit damage. So it's insane damage. And on top of that, the team is also doing really good damage. Tribi, Cyrene, and Hyacinth are all helping with damage output. But yeah, Mydei now being able to spam Godslayers, and if you have won more better. That was like the second playstyle that was introduced for him that is overall better to use. And it really took him until the end of the Amphorius arc for him to finally get a buff, which at least put him in a lot better of a spot than he was previously. Like, he was never bad, like he still was really good going forward, but he was definitely the most like underlooked DPS. But now with the buff of Cyrene, he is a lot stronger. So Mydei was kind of like a DPS that you could kind of just overlook. Did his job well, was able to do good enough damage to clear, but when it came to what everything else we were getting, it was kind of just hard to, you know, pay too much mind to him. But at least now with the release of Cyrene and that team setup, he is a lot more valuable. And now let's start with Phainon. So reasons why you should start with Phainon, just how I talk about any other DPS, it is really simple. If you are in need of a DPS, that should be your main reason to pull Phainon. Even if you don't have Ceridra, he will be fine by just running him alongside Dawning for sustain if you do need it. Then you would just run Bronya or Sunday. Sunday would be better. And then your last slot could either be another targeter, or if you have Cyrene, you can run her alongside that team. You just want to make sure you have a team that gets him into ultimate properly and efficiently as well, because the goal is to get him into ultimate as possible so he can finally start doing damage. So if you're in need of a DPS and you have the team set up to get him into ultimate quick enough, then that would be your main incentive to actually pull him. Maybe you already have Ceridra because you maybe pulled her for a Noxa instead. Maybe at times where you're not using a Noxa, you can put Ceridra with Phainon and you'd have a really strong team set up right there. Like, just Phainon with Ceridra alone is just really strong. Then the third slot would either go to Cyrene or someone like Sunday, and then your last slot either Dawning or another support for more damage. So again, if you have a need of a DPS that is strong and you do have the team to get him into ultimate efficiently, then Phainon would be a really good pickup for you, especially if you also have summons to somewhat vertically invest in him. So getting his Lycone, especially, even if you're able to go up to E2, if you are able to get up his E2, if you are able to get his E2, then he is absolute god. But just at like an E0, S0, E0, S1 standpoint, if you at least have the ability to get him into ultimate frequently and you are in need of a DPS, he is a really strong pickup. Reasons why you shouldn't would be the opposite. So if you are not really in need of a DPS, then you shouldn't pull for a DPS, obviously. Maybe you're someone who needs a sustain more for another team, then obviously that would be what you should look out and save for. Or maybe you are in need of a DPS, but you don't have a really strong team. Like, let's say maybe you're like on like the middle ground player, or maybe a newer player, where maybe your supports are only Bronya and also like 4-star Tingyun. Or another example would be maybe your supports are super taken up with other teams and you don't really have the space to give them to Phainon. In the case where you can't get them into ultimate efficiently, or just have a team that makes them do solid damage, then in that case I would skip. Next up is Cipher. So Cipher, the only definitive reason on why you should summon is if you to this day still use Phainon or Acheron. If you use those teams, definitely pick up Cipher. Honestly, even if you use Archer, I personally do recommend picking up Cipher because I think Cipher just works so good in that team. Silverwolf does work just as good in that team, but I personally like using Cipher more, especially because she can generate skill points better in my opinion, and then End Nuke is just so valuable. So those three, technically two teams, are like where I recommend you to pull it regardless. Although you should know for Acheron specifically, you would want to get Cypher's Lycone so she can apply a debuff to give Acheron stacks, otherwise it's going to be a bit rough. And then another reason would be if you really just need a unit that can work on multiple teams and can help you free up team slots for other teams, like maybe taking over your Tribute in a certain spot, letting Tribute go to a different team that needs it more. In those cases, I definitely would recommend picking Cipher because again, she's just so universally good that she can straight up work as a replacement for a certain unit, so you can free them up and put them up on a different team that might need the help from Chibi more, or Sunday more if you're not really in need of the action advance, or whatever, you get what I mean. So if you do need someone to free up team slots, she would be a really good pickup because she can really just be slotted in anywhere. And of course, for reasons not to summon is if you don't run those teams that I did mention and you don't really have a need for a team slot freer. So your teams are already set, but you don't need to shift them around because you're clearing just fine. You clear very low cycle imbalance. You get full points Pure Fiction, high points APOC, whatever. Just as someone who would not really need another unit to free up more team space. In that case, you wouldn't really have a reason to pull her. So in that case, feel free to skip. And then Mydei, just like Phainon as a DPS, if you are in need of a DPS, Mydei is a solid pickup, especially if you do have his teams. Just something to note is, as an HP scaler, he is working with a little less options, so your options are only really running Sunday, Tribi, and then Hyacine, Cyrene setup. Only Hyacine if you are running the Cyrene setup. If you are able to give him that setup, he is going to perform really good, and I definitely recommend picking up as a DPS for that team setup. Or if you don't have that, but you are able to use Sunday and at least someone like Tribi, Mydei, then he's going to be really strong. Last thought would just go to Luocha or Gallagher, or if you are doing sustain this, even someone like Ron May works really good with him. So if you do have a team set up that is free to use with him, so again, the characters I mentioned, or especially the Cyrene and Hyacinth setup, Mydei is going to be a really strong DPS, and if you are in need of a really strong DPS, he is going to be a nice pickup for you. And then reasons why you shouldn't pick up, just like Phainon, if you don't need a DPS, that's going to be the #1 skip reason. More into depth reasons would be if you don't have the Cyrene and Hyacinth setup, maybe you're using Cyrene somewhere else, or you don't have her in general, but you have Hyacinth. In that case, without Cyrene, you don't want to use Hyacinth with Mydei really at all. Let's also say maybe Hyacinth is like the only one you own there, you don't own Cyrene. Tribby is already used up on a different team as well, so maybe you have like a Castris Hyacinth Tribby team, so that's like already kind of set. And you can't really give him much else. If you are just really working with like Sunday Mydei and like some other support and like some other sustain, he's not going to perform too well. Especially since, as I mentioned, HP scalers just kind of don't have too much to work with. So if you're not able to do Cyrene plus Hyacinth setup, and you don't really have other units like Tribby to work with him, or even someone like Cipher already, then it would be a bit rough to make him actually do some solid damage. So in that case, I would recommend skipping as well. That does bring this video to a close. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all our types of Star Wars content. Check the description to join the Discord server and check out my Archive channel, and I'll see you later. Peace out.